Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Twice as Lively with Ken Heckenlively. That would be me, your host, Ken Heckenlively, with my Peace Coffee. The title of today's episode, Fat People in Masks. Yes, that's right. Fat people in masks. Am I going to be a little bit off color today? Well, I don't think so. You might have to pay attention for a little while to understand where I'm really going, but I have nothing against fat people, masks, or fat people in masks. But you must use all of these things appropriately, and I think it's important to have the right point of view. Okay, to help us get started with the right point of view, as always, we have our simultaneous sip. It's Pete's Coffee. It's a cafe Americano with a little bit of room for cream and honey because we all need a little sugar with our caffeine. So it's a little after 12 o'clock on the West Coast, which means that in every spot in the continental United States, it is socially inappropriate to be drinking alcohol. But if you are, if that's what's in your beverage of choice, you won't get any judgments from me. You might get some comments, but I'll reserve those judgments. Here we go, simultaneous sip. Ah, so delicious, so delicious. Okay, the title of my broadcast today, Fat People in Masks. We're going to talk about masks because we are 5 years past the pandemic and nobody should be wearing masks. During the pandemics, it was also a bad idea to be wearing masks, but I can understand how a lot of people were fooled by our scientific authorities who said a lot of stupid things during the pandemic. Now, most of the people who said it may not have generated the stupidity, but they certainly repeated it. So let me tell you one of my stupid experiences during the pandemic. So in approximately August of 2020, my co-author, Dr. Judy Mikovits, and I put together this book, The Case Against Masks, 10 Reasons Why Mask Use Should Be Limited. Notice, I was talking about reasons why maybe masks weren't always a good idea. So, my co-author and I want to review the arguments for and against masks and to look at what the evidence said, because pretty much everybody in the country was being told to wear masks for several hours a day. Now, what did the evidence really show? Well, if people had bothered to read the book, people like those behind the scenes at Amazon who ended up delisting the book, they would have seen that our book was relatively balanced. It looked at the evidence for when masks are appropriate. One of the things which was interesting is that there's really not a lot of good evidence about masks. I think one of the most interesting pieces of evidence about masks is that when nurses and doctors were required to wear masks 8 to 10 hours a day, they found that about 25% of those individuals reported feeling lightheaded and having headaches. Now, you might say, well, Kent, being lightheaded and having a headache isn't necessarily a health problem. And I would agree that might be true. But what I don't agree with is that should be the end of the discussion. To me, that seems like the beginning of the discussion. Probably like the same question of if you started smoking cigarettes and a quarter of the people reported having a headache after doing it for a couple days, you might want to ask about the long-term consequences. Now, there really are no good studies about the effectiveness of masks and how healthy they make people. But one of the things that we brought up quite early on is just some of the basic facts about human physiology. And what you should know is that when you breathe in the air, what happens is that you are extracting oxygen from the air and you are exhaling carbon dioxide. So, in the air itself, the amount of carbon dioxide is relatively low. I think it's 0.004 percentage. Is that right? Or is it 0.04? No, I think it's 0.04%. Okay. So carbon dioxide is relatively low in the atmosphere. When you exhale, the carbon dioxide is at about 4%. So that means your body, by the act of breathing, has increased the amount of carbon dioxide by 100-fold. Okay, so this is really important to understand that the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, I think, is about 0.04%, but coming out of your mouth, it's 4%. So that's a 100-fold increase. Carbon dioxide starts to be dangerous to human beings when it's around 10%. So when you're breathing out and you're wearing a mask, what happens is that mask is getting filled with carbon dioxide. It would make sense that breathing additional carbon dioxide is not that healthy for you. And that was the point that we were making. We weren't saying that the evidence was overwhelming. We were saying that just simple logic suggests that if wearing a mask for a couple hours causes 25% of the people to develop headaches and feeling lightheaded, that might be something you want to investigate. And nothing really had been investigated. So, what are the other problems associated with masks? Well, what happens is that mask itself becomes a trap for any bacteria or viruses that you are breathing out. And because it sticks on your face, what that means is that you are continuing to inhale that bacteria and virus that you had exhaled. Also, the fact that your mask is staying on for so long means that becomes a place where bacteria and viruses can grow. So, these are considerations. The other consideration is, what effect does sunlight have on bacteria and viruses that you exhale? So, sunlight is a disinfectant. So, evidence has shown that the bacteria and viruses that you exhale in your breath are essentially disinfected by about 2 minutes of sunlight. So that means if you're out and about, the best thing that you can do for yourself and others is not be wearing a mask, because the sunlight is going to disinfect it. So Dr. Mikovits and I made what I believe were very reasonable observations based on the evidence, and contained in our book, The Case Against Masks. What happened when that book got published? Did scientific experts jump up to debate our conclusions? No. What happened is Amazon, probably at the request of people in the Trump administration, delisted our book. That meant you could not buy this book on Amazon. Now, for those of you who may think, well, Kent, I understand what you're saying, but that was a responsible thing to do given that things were unclear. Well, however, Barnes and Noble continued to publish this book. So Amazon didn't have to fold to whatever pressure campaign caused them to delist this book. That means they just didn't sell it. Another bizarre thing. So I was talking to my publisher, Tony Lyons at Skyhorse Press, about this and what we were going to do because the book had been selling fairly well. At one point, he told me that Elon Musk was aware of that and was going to be talking about that publicly. Apparently, he never did. As you know, he went on to buy Twitter, turn it into X, and say free speech. And if I contributed in any way to Elon doing that, I'm thankful. But I have to say, Elon, why didn't you stand up for my book? That would have been a nice thing to do. So a couple months after the book was delisted on Amazon, but could still be purchased on Barnes and Noble, my publisher went back to Amazon and asked about it, and they said, well, we will publish that book, but could you not have such a provocative cover and title? So on Amazon right now, you can buy this book, The Truth About Masks, exploring theories against wearing them. I'm a little bit confused. I've got two books here, The Case Against Masks, The Truth About Masks. They're the exact same book. Which cover seems more provocative to you? And in a democracy, isn't it up to us, the public, to decide what we believe or not? But we don't have people like Amazon deciding what we can and can't read or think. So kudos to Barnes and Noble for standing up for freedom of speech. And I just got to say, Amazon, you totally blew it. So that was during the pandemic. Now, the title of today's episode is Fat People in Masks. So I keep seeing this same pattern, which is individuals who are very overweight, and I'm talking 70, 80, 100 pounds, are wearing masks. And I say to myself, what the hell is going on? If you're overweight and you think the way to help your health is to wear a mask, that's about the craziest thing I've ever seen. It makes me doubt not only your intelligence, but your psychological makeup. Because it seems like people who are excessively overweight are those who are wearing masks in high proportions more than 5 years after the pandemic. Here's a better way to think about this. If you are severely overweight, like 70 to 100 pounds, you're probably not getting good oxygen. You need to improve your circulatory system. Now, I'm not one who shames fat people. I'm not saying this is a fault of your will. But if you want to take responsibility for yourself, you have to ask the question, why are so many people in the United States obese? That's not a value judgment. That's an observation. Science is about observing things and reporting them accurately. So, Americans, as a people, are severely obese. They are more obese than people in Asian countries and European countries. Since this is primarily a European country and probably to a good extent an Asian country as well, um, especially in California, the question is, why are these people who are from countries which do not have these levels of obesity so overweight? Well, Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has a potential answer. Robert Kennedy points out that in European countries and in Asian countries, there are about 400 ingredients which are allowed to be in your food. That makes sense. We have a long history of eating a certain number of ingredients, and if we added too many, well, that might have unexpected effects on us. By contrast, Secretary Kennedy estimates that in the United States food supply, there are about 10,000 ingredients. Now, why is it that the typical European diet consists of only about 400 ingredients in food? They have far lower rates of obesity, and yet in the United States, we have something like 10,000 ingredients allowed in our foods. Well, Secretary Kennedy also goes into the question of who is running the food companies. For those of you who were alive in the 1990s, you'll recall that many state attorney generals were going after tobacco companies for loading their cigarettes up with ingredients which tended to hook users. Many of these tobacco companies lost big verdicts, had to engage in large settlements, and as a result, they were looking to put their money someplace else. That someplace else that they put their money, according to Secretary Kennedy, was in the food companies, where they used their same scientists to put ingredients into foods which would hook you like the cigarettes did. Now, could these additional ingredients cause you also to be obese? Yes, they could. So I'm not saying that it's proven. I'm just saying that when you observe two different situations and you're looking at the same species, Homo sapiens, and you're observing vast differences between them, maybe that is something you want to further investigate. So, for those individuals who are severely overweight and think that the thing that you need to do is wear a mask to be safe, I encourage you to look as to whether you are eating a lot of ultra processed food. I think that ultra processed food is probably a huge contributor to the obesity epidemic, as well as a lot of our chronic diseases. So I'm not telling you I'm perfect, but I eat a pretty clean diet. I try to exercise and I try to do a lot of things for my health. And so when I see people trying to do things for their health, like obese people wearing a mask, I'm like, well, good for you trying to do something, but I think you're doing the wrong thing. And so it's my obligation as a fellow human being to suggest to those obese people who are wearing masks that perhaps they want to look at their consumption of ultra processed food. Maybe once they start cleaning up their diet, maybe they want to start looking at doing some exercise, but you really need good oxygen in your lungs to be healthy. So I say this with love and affection for my fellow human beings and the desire for them to thrive. Okay, moving on from fat people in masks, let's talk about blood pressure. So, for the past couple of years, my blood pressure has been a little bit high. And it's been questionable because it seems like I also have a little bit of white coat syndrome, which is when I go into the doctor's office and they take my blood pressure, it'll be like 140, 150 over 85, 90. But let me leave the doctor's office, go and take it at another location, maybe take a couple minutes to catch my breath. It will usually drop into the low 130s, high 120s. And, oftentimes I get a normal reading. But one of the things that I had thought about for the past couple years is that while I loved teaching and my students and the parent community, I felt like there was strain with my colleagues and the administration because I wasn't your typical California public school liberal teacher. I dressed nicely. I also respected the fact that public schools are public schools. They are not places to comment on political situations, especially when I'm a science teacher. I was a science teacher. I felt that my job was to teach the curriculum, not opine on my views on current situations or political figures. So, whether the president was Barack Obama, Donald Trump, or Joe Biden, in 20 years, I don't think I ever commented about any of those presidents. That was not something that was done by my colleagues. And in fact, I would argue that there was an aggressive, anti patriotic feeling among teachers, probably expressed no more clearly than with the Pledge of Allegiance that we did every day, for which I would always stand and put my hand over my heart. And I heard from many other teachers that they chose not to stand during the Pledge of Allegiance. I don't think that's just a political thing. I think that is showing great disrespect for our system and setting a terrible example for students. God damn it, if you're a teacher and the Pledge of Allegiance is being read over the PA system, you stand up. I don't care whether you're Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, or Independent. When the Pledge of Allegiance is said, you stand the hell up. That's my thinking. So you can imagine that a patriotic guy like me who follows the rules that a lot of other teachers don't might not be that popular with that crowd. And it was something that was under the surface, because if there's one thing that liberals seem to excel at, it's excelling at cold hatred. And that was something that I felt, just cold hatred, indifference. Pretty much felt like an old dog that if I got hit by a car, they wouldn't really care. It was made even clearer to me in my final days as a science teacher that you would expect that after 20 years of teaching, my colleagues in the science department would do something like say, "Hey, Kent, let's go out for a drink after work to celebrate your retirement." Did anything like that happen? No. Did anybody comment about it? No. Did I say anything about it? No, because it's not really my place. So you can imagine that I have wondered for some time if the cold hostility from my colleagues and also the administration, because I did bring this up to the administration a couple times only to get zero help. So you can imagine that I wondered for quite some time, I wonder if my slightly elevated blood pressure has anything to do with the fact that I believe most of the adults who surround me in my teaching hate my guts. Well, lo and behold, I've taken a number of blood pressure readings in the past couple weeks, and my blood pressure has gone from the high 120s to and low 130s to yesterday when I went and took my blood pressure, it was 107 over 75. So it seems like removing myself from toxic people has an amazing effect on my blood pressure rates. In conversations with my doctor, he had often told me that the current standard of 120 over 80 for a healthy individual is not really a healthy individual. It's normal for our society, but among people who live in hunter gatherer societies, their blood pressure is much lower, kind of around 110 to 105. So, simply by removing myself from toxic people, it seems like I've gained a 15 to 20 point drop in my blood pressure. That might be something that you want to consider. Maybe you want to look to those areas in your life in which you seem to have a lot of stress. And you might want to ask yourself, is this stress really so critical to me? Or what I'm doing, is it worth the cost of this stress? I say to myself that the most important thing that I have is my health. So if somebody is doing something, or I'm in a situation in which my health isn't really paramount, I probably need to remove myself from that situation. So, my overall message today is you need to treat yourself well. You need to treat yourself well because there may be a lot of people who are not interested in the best for you. When I look at the fact that our country allows 10,000 ingredients in your food, but other governments only allow 400 ingredients, I asked to myself, is the government really looking out for you? Is science in the United States really looking out for you? When science does things like says everybody needs to wear a mask and then removes that conversation from the public's ability to read, as they did when they removed my book from Amazon, it doesn't seem like science is really interested in helping you. And probably is why a great deal of the public is dismissive of a lot of opinions from the so called experts, because it seems like the so called experts have a really bad track record of predicting things. So try to remove yourself from toxic food. Really look closely at whether you are consuming genuine food and not a bunch of chemicals. Look to the people you're surrounding yourself with. If they are toxic, if they are not interested in you as a human being, maybe it's a good idea to get away from them. So, my message, as always, is trying to find the best strategy for the maximum amount of health and happiness for all of you. That's all I'm doing here. If I say you're fat, that's because you are. That's a medical condition. It doesn't mean that's everything. It just identifies the problem and asks for you to come up with a solution. That's all I have for you today. Hopefully, this is not the best part of your day. Hopefully, the best part of your day is talking to the people in your own life and having genuine relations with human beings and not counting on some good looking dude on the internet for your social connections. All right. Have a great day. See you tomorrow.